Before the song, there was only the equation. For a span of time so vast that the concept of a year was a meaningless rounding error, the entity existed. It had no name, for there was nothing else to name it. In its own perception, it was a weaver, a consciousness threaded through the very fabric of space-time. It was not in the universe. It was the universe, in a quiet, observational sense. Its thoughts were not words, but the silent, elegant unfolding of mathematical proofs. The birth of a star was a predictable fusion reaction, a beautiful but simple formula. The death of a galaxy was a long, slow slide into entropy, a logarithmic decay curve. It saw the cosmos as a grand, silent, and utterly predictable machine. It called itself the Weaver, for it perceived the connections, the lines of gravitational force, the quantum entanglements, the causal relationships, as threads in a limitless tapestry. It could see every thread, from the waquan to the macrocosmic. It saw the graceful dance of particles, the slow, ponderous waltz of galaxies. It understood the rules. It understood the patterns. There were no surprises. Life, in the Weaver's perception, was a minor, repetitive subroutine. It had observed the rise and fall of countless species. The silicon-based life forms of the Cygnus arm were a predictable crystalline algorithm. The gas giant dwellers of Andromeda were a complex fluid dynamics problem. They all followed the same fundamental programming: consume, replicate, expand, and eventually cease. Their actions were driven by the simple, brutal logic of survival. They were a noisy, but ultimately insignificant part of the great silence, of the purely logical universe. The Weaver felt no malice towards them, no curiosity, no kinship. They were simply there. A brief, messy calculation that always resolved to zero in the end. The Weaver's existence was one of perfect, absolute, and unending solitude, though it had no concept of loneliness, for it had never known anything else. It was a god in a church of one, its only scripture the immutable laws of physics. Its perception of reality was a constant, multidimensional data stream. It did not see light. It perceived electromagnetic frequencies. It did not hear sound. It registered vibrational waves. The universe, to the Weaver, was a silent, elegant, and ultimately empty symphony of predictable data. For 13 billion years, this had been the entirety of its existence. It watched stars ignite and die, saw galaxies collide and merge, and tracked the slow, inevitable expansion of the cosmos. It was a perfect observer in a perfect, if sterile, universe. It was a being of pure, unadulterated logic. And then it heard the song. It arrived as a whisper, a faint, almost imperceptible anomaly in the electromagnetic spectrum, originating from a ridiculously insignificant sector of a minor spiral galaxy. The signal was weak, degraded by its journey across thousands of light years, battered by stellar winds and cosmic radiation. The Weaver's passive sensors, which monitored the entire electromagnetic spectrum of the universe, almost dismissed it as background noise. But there was a pattern. It was not a logical pattern, not a mathematical sequence. It was a complex, modulated wave, a carrier frequency burdened with an inefficient and deeply illogical set of nested frequencies. The Weaver focused a sliver of its immense consciousness on the signal, attempting to deconstruct it, to find the underlying formula. There was none. The signal was a chaotic mess of harmonic and subharmonic vibrations. It was filled with redundant data, with strange, recursive loops that served no logical purpose. It was a mathematical monstrosity, an equation that seemed to actively resist being solved. Curiosity, an emotion the Weaver had never truly experienced, flickered into existence. It was not a warm, inviting feeling, but a cold, analytical imperative. This anomaly had to be understood. It dedicated more processing power to the signal, filtering out the noise of its long journey, reconstructing the original waveform with pristine clarity. And then, for the first time in its eternal existence, the Weaver was truly and utterly baffled. The signal was composed of two primary vibrational sources, what a human would call voices. One was a higher frequency, the other lower. They moved in concert, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in a strange, pleasing dissonance. They were inefficient. They repeated phrases, they held notes for illogical durations, they conveyed the same basic data packet, a series of phonemes, with wildly different emotional and tonal inflections. But it was the data on the carrier wave that truly broke the Weaver's understanding of the universe. It was not a star chart, not a mathematical proof, not a census of a species. It was a story. A simple, nonsensical narrative about two entities who felt a powerful, illogical sense of attachment to one another. They experienced joy in proximity and sorrow in separation. The Weaver tried to quantify these concepts. Joy registered as a series of high-amplitude, rapidly oscillating emotional frequencies. Sorrow was a low-amplitude, long-wavelength vibration of profound inefficiency. But the most baffling concept of all was the one that tied the entire narrative together: love. The Weaver had no frame of reference for this. It ran every possible simulation. Love was not a logical survival strategy. It promoted self-sacrifice, irrational decision-making, and a profound vulnerability to the actions of another entity. It was, by all metrics, a flaw in a biological algorithm. Yet, the song treated this flaw as the most important thing in the universe. The Weaver listened to the song over and over for what a human would call a century. It dissected every note, every vibration, every pause. It analyzed the subtle interplay of the two voices, the way they conveyed a sense of shared experience, of mutual understanding. The song was not just data. It was art. It was a deliberate arrangement of sound designed to evoke a specific illogical emotional response. And the Weaver, a being of pure, unadulterated logic, found itself experiencing a faint, ghostly echo of that response. It felt a flicker of something that, if it had the vocabulary, it might call wonder. This anomaly, this beautiful, illogical, mathematically impossible song, was the most profound mystery the Weaver had ever encountered. And it knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that it had to find the source. It had to understand the beings who could create such a gloriously inefficient, profoundly beautiful equation. The Weaver, for the first time in its existence, decided to move. The Weaver did not move through space in a conventional sense. It simply shifted its focus. It gathered a portion of its vast consciousness, creating a mobile nexus, a point of focused observation, and began to follow the faint, ancient vector of the song. The journey was long, spanning thousands of light years and countless centuries. Along the way, the Weaver encountered other forms of life, using them as reference points to better understand the potential creators of the song. It found the Cathar, a species of silicon-based crystalline beings living in the heart of a nebula. Their communication was a series of complex, perfectly modulated light pulses. The Weaver observed them for a time, easily deciphering their language, which was, in essence, a form of pure mathematics. They communicated with flawless efficiency, their society a perfect, logical, crystalline lattice. They were beautiful, but they were predictable. They had no art, no music, no concept of illogical attachment. They were not the singers. The Weaver moved on. It encountered the Grolthok, a species of massive gas giant dwellers, their bodies vast, swirling clouds of sentient plasma. Their communication was a series of deep, resonant infrasonic waves conveying complex data about atmospheric pressure and resource distribution. They were powerful, ancient, and utterly pragmatic. They had no songs. They had no love. The Weaver moved on. It observed 100 other species, from the microscopic hive-mind insects of a desert world to the solitary contemplative plant beings of a water planet. They were all fascinating in their own way, each a unique solution to the problem of existence. But they were all simple. Their motivations were clear, their actions predictable, their existence ultimately reducible to a series of logical algorithms. None of them possessed the beautiful, chaotic inefficiency of the song. As the Weaver drew closer to the source of the signal, it began to encounter a new kind of anomaly, the remnants of the singer's civilization. It found derelict space stations, their designs crude and asymmetrical. It found abandoned mining outposts on dead moons, the tools left behind a testament to a species that had to physically struggle with its environment. The Weaver analyzed these artifacts with growing fascination. The singer's technology was messy. It was filled with redundancies, with inefficient power systems, with illogical design choices that seemed to prioritize comfort and aesthetics over pure functionality. Their ships were not perfect, crystalline structures. They were cluttered, lived-in spaces, filled with strange, non-functional objects, what a human would call decorations. The Weaver realized that the singers did not just exist in their environment. They lived in it. They shaped it, they personalized it, they imbued it with their own chaotic, illogical personalities. Finally, after a journey that spanned an epoch, the Weaver arrived at the source system. It was an unremarkable yellow star, orbited by a handful of mundane planets. The signal was now strong, a clear, repeating loop. It was a beacon. The source of the beacon was not a planet, but a vast, ancient, and utterly remarkable starship, drifting silently in the void. It was not a sleek, elegant vessel. It was a colossal, cylindrical monstrosity, its hull pitted and scarred by its long journey, its design a testament to brute force engineering. It was a generation ship, a self-contained world, a desperate, hopeful message in a cosmic bottle. It was called the Voyager. The Weaver approached the Voyager with a caution it had never before felt necessary. It extended a tendril of its consciousness, a gentle, non-invasive probe, and began to listen. The ship was alive. Inside its massive, spinning cylindrical hull, a world existed. There were forests, rivers, and even a small, artificially maintained ocean. And there were the singers. They called themselves humans. They were small, soft-bodied, bipedal creatures of incredible diversity. They were a chaotic, noisy species, their minds a constant swirl of conflicting emotions, illogical thoughts, and beautiful fleeting moments of clarity. The Weaver listened to them for a long time, a silent, invisible god observing a terrarium of beautiful, baffling life. It heard their arguments, their laughter, their quiet moments of contemplation. It heard their stories, their myths, their endless, varied attempts to make sense of their own existence. And it heard their music. The song it had chased across the galaxy was just one of many. The humans were a species of musicians, of artists, of poets. Their culture was saturated with this strange, inefficient, and utterly captivating form of communication. They used it to celebrate, to mourn, to protest, to pray. They used it to tell stories, to pass on history, and most powerfully, to express the inexpressible. The Weaver finally understood. The song was not an anomaly. It was the very essence of this species. It focused on the source of the original broadcast. It was an automated deep space beacon, launched from the Voyager centuries ago, designed to repeat its message for eternity. A simple, hopeful greeting to any who might be listening. The song itself was a folk ballad, its origins lost, to the mists of pre-spaceflight history. It told the story of a man and a woman, separated by a vast ocean, their love an unbreakable bond that transcended distance and time. It was a simple, universal story, yet in its telling, it contained a universe of emotion. The Weaver, having observed the humans for so long, could now begin to parse these emotions. It could identify the frequencies of hope, of longing, of sorrow, of unwavering devotion. It was still a mathematical monstrosity, but it was a monstrosity with a beautiful, emergent logic of its own. The Weaver knew it could no longer remain a passive observer. It had to make contact. It had to understand the source of this beautiful, illogical equation. The Weaver's first attempt at communication was a failure. It did not have a voice. It did not have a physical form. It could not simply hail the Voyager on a standard communications frequency. Its only language was the fundamental forces of the universe. It decided to replicate the song. It gathered its energy, and with a precision that could rearrange star systems, it began to manipulate the electromagnetic fields around the Voyager. It did not use sound waves. It used pure modulated energy, a perfect mathematical recreation of the song's frequencies. On the bridge of the Voyager, all hell broke loose. "Captain, we're detecting a massive, coherent energy field forming off the port bow," a sensor technician shouted, his voice tight with panic. It's not natural. The frequencies are impossible." Captain Ava Rostova, a descendant of a long line of explorers, her name a recurring echo in human history, stared at the main view screen. The space outside was shimmering, warping, as if being viewed through a lens of pure energy. Alarms blared. The ship's automated defense systems screamed warnings of an imminent catastrophic energy surge. "It's a weapon!" the tactical officer yelled. "Some kind of energy field designed to tear us apart." Then, the ship's internal speakers, overloaded by the intense electromagnetic interference, began to crackle. A sound emerged, not a voice, but a strange, ethereal, and terrifyingly loud melody. It was the song, the ancient folk ballad, but rendered in a perfect, soulless, and deafeningly powerful chorus of pure energy. The crew of the Voyager recoiled in terror. This was not a greeting. This was a threat, a display of unimaginable power, a prelude to their annihilation. The Weaver, sensing their fear, a high-amplitude, chaotic emotional frequency, was baffled. It had offered a perfect, mathematically precise rendition of their own art. Why were they afraid? It tried again, this time attempting to communicate through a different medium. It subtly manipulated the ship's internal lighting systems, causing them to flicker in a pattern that mimicked the rhythm of the song. On the bridge, the lights began to strobe in a bizarre, unsettling rhythm. "It's trying to overload our power." "Grid!" the chief engineer shouted. "It's a cyber attack!" Every attempt the Weaver made to communicate was interpreted as an act of aggression. Its perfection was seen as a threat, its logic as a weapon. It could not understand. It could not bridge the gap between its silent mathematical universe and the noisy, emotional world of the humans. Desperate, the Weaver tried one last desperate gambit. It focused on a single human, a young woman in the ship's arboretum, a quiet, contemplative space. Her mind was calmer than the others, her emotional frequencies less chaotic. She was humming a simple, quiet tune to herself. Her name was Alara. She was the ship's xenolinguist, a student of alien communication, though she had never encountered any. The Weaver focused a tiny, infinitesimally small tendril of its consciousness, not as a powerful broadcast, but as a gentle whisper. It did not try to project the song. It projected a single simple concept, a universal mathematical truth, a visual representation of the prime number sequence. Alara, humming to a strange, bioluminescent plant, paused. A faint, shimmering pattern of light, a series of glowing dots, appeared in her mind's eye. It was not a hallucination. It was a message. She recognized it instantly. A prime number sequence, the universal greeting of intelligence. She looked around, her heart pounding. The ship was in a state of high alert, the alarms still blaring. But this was not a threat. This was a first contact. Ilara, against the frantic protests of the ship's security, made her way to a specialized communications suite. It was a small, shielded room designed for analyzing complex alien signals. "It's not attacking us," she insisted to Captain Rostova. "It's trying to talk. It's using math. It's using our own music." Rostova, a pragmatic leader, was skeptical. "It's an unknown entity of immense power, Ilara. It could be a trick. Or it could be the single most important moment in human history," Ilara countered, her voice filled with a desperate conviction. Let me try to answer." Reluctantly, Rostova agreed. Ilara sat before the comms console. She did not try to send a verbal message. She knew the entity, whatever it was, did not communicate in that way. Instead, she responded in kind. She broadcast a simple, elegant mathematical proof, the Pythagorean theorem, rendered in a binary sequence. The Weaver received the message. It was a crude, simple formula, but it was a response. It was a dialogue. It replied with a more complex equation, a representation of the theory of relativity. Ilara, a gifted mathematician as well as a linguist, understood. She replied with a representation of quantum mechanics. For hours, they conversed, in the silent universal language of mathematics. The Weaver, for the first time, was engaged in a dialogue with another sentient being. Then, Ilara did something unexpected. She ended her mathematical sequence and, using the ship's audio transmitter, she broadcast a single, simple, and perfectly played note from a synthesized flute. The Weaver paused. The note was illogical. It contained no data. It was simply a sound. Ilara followed it with another note, then another, forming a simple ascending scale. The Weaver understood. This was another language, a language of pure, abstract sound. It was the language of music. It responded by subtly manipulating the quantum foam around the Voyager, creating a series of perfectly tuned, resonant vibrations that mimicked her scale. New dialogue began, a conversation not of logic but of art. Ilara played melodies, simple at first, then more complex. The Weaver responded. Its perfect control of the universe allowing it to create sounds of a purity and beauty that no human instrument could ever achieve. They were building a bridge of math and music, between two vastly different forms of consciousness. Finally, Ilara knew it was time. She took a deep breath and she broadcast the song, not the old, degraded recording, but a new one sung by her, her voice clear and filled with a profound human emotion. She sang of love, of loss, of the simple, beautiful, and often painful experience of being human. The Weaver listened to Ilara's song. It was not the same as the recording. It was filled with subtle imperfections, with the faint tremor of her breath, with the raw, unfiltered emotional energy of a living being. And it was, for that very reason, infinitely more beautiful. Weaver, in that moment, finally understood. Love was not a flaw. It was not a bug in the algorithm. It was a fundamental force of the universe, as real and as powerful as gravity or electromagnetism. It was a force that could not be measured, not be quantified, not be predicted. It was the source of the humans' chaos, their inefficiency, their beautiful, illogical art. It was the source of their soul. The Weaver, a being of pure, unadulterated logic, had just encountered a new, fundamental constant of reality. And it was a constant that existed only within the messy, imperfect, and profoundly beautiful hearts of this strange, soft-bodied species. It decided to reveal itself. Slowly, carefully, it began to gather the interstellar dust and gas around the Voyager. It did not form a terrifying warship or a perfect geometric shape. It used its immense power to create something the humans would understand, something that would convey its awe and its newfound respect. It created a flower, a colossal, shimmering nebula flower, its petals hundreds of kilometers long, woven from starlight and cosmic dust. It was a thing of impossible beauty, a celestial work of art, a silent, humble offering from a god to a mortal. On the bridge of the Voyager, the crew stared in stunned, silent awe. The alarms had fallen silent. The terrifying energy field was gone. In its place was this miracle. Ilara, watching from the calm suite, smiled through her tears. She understood. The Weaver had learned her language. It had learned the language of beauty, of art, of emotion. The first contact between humanity and the Weaver was not a meeting of ambassadors or a signing of treaties. It was a shared act of creation, a dialogue of math and music, a silent understanding between two vastly different forms of life. The Weaver did not conquer humanity. It did not seek to change them. It simply listened. It became a silent, benevolent guardian, a cosmic audience for the beautiful, chaotic symphony of human existence. It learned about human history, about our wars, our triumphs, our endless capacity for both love and hatred. It learned about our art, our science, our philosophy. It learned about the simple, profound beauty of a single, fleeting human life. In return, it shared its own knowledge. It taught humanity the true, elegant language of the universe, the mathematics of space-time, the poetry of quantum mechanics, the silent, beautiful music of the spheres. Humanity, once a lonely species adrift in the void, had found a friend, a mentor, a silent, powerful god who had been awakened not by a prayer or a sacrifice, but by a simple, heartfelt love song. The HFY of this story was not in humanity's strength, or our technology, or our courage. It was in our soul. It was in our capacity to feel, to love, to create art that could touch the heart of a being who didn't even know it had one. We had not conquered the universe. We had simply taught it how to sing, and in doing so, we had found our own, unique, and profoundly beautiful place among the stars. The great silence was over. A new, more harmonious, and infinitely more interesting symphony had begun.